So I believe I have found one of the most important puzzles, pieces to the puzzle here. I'm not necessarily sure exactly what the hell piece of the puzzle it is, but that's why I wanted to basically make this video and get it thrown out there so then maybe people can kind of draw to a more precise conclusion on what this potentially is unraveling and discovering here. So I've been coming up with all these. I've been getting a lot better in poker as far as like with the math and stuff, and then it dawned on me. I believe I came up with one of the most inclusive mathematical probabilities that everybody forgot about, or potentially overlooked. And this right here, with this formula, science should be able to solve a lot more of their equations and probably even figure out the source of life, which I've already concluded that this formula solves the source of life, which links back to there being a God, being a creator, because that's the definition of infinite, to have endless amounts of knowledge. Okay, so I'm basically trying to reveal how the math of the universe basically points to there having to be a God, because, well, when you're dealing with times infinity, the only thing to balance times infinity is something that is equal to times infinity. So when you define times infinity, you have a few variations to work with it. But the biggest thing about times infinity to conclude and define of times infinity is God. That's the equation of the God equation, because God equals times infinity, to have endless amounts of knowledge, endless amounts of possession, endless amounts of everything. No beginning, so you can't reach a beginning because it's endless, it's infinite. It goes on and on. You always add more, add more, add more, add more. So the only thing that can balance an equation like that is God. But I'm going to try to explain and prove how this ties into my formula and how it links and everything. So try to understand where I'm coming from. So I basically was sitting here and I realized, oh, you know what? Math works in a way where it is basically math works in a way where you can always simplify it. So anyway, the beauty of my formula is I'm not anybody that's very advanced with math. I'm just kind of exploitive with all the very simple stuff. So I kind of just exploited the whole division and multiplication, and I just discovered, oh, the boundary of infinite that no one was really noticing, and I've never seen very many. I'm sure if I go into deep math, they're going to start calculating with the times infinite, or whatever, but and dividing by the times infinite. But as far as I'm aware, this is one of the first videos that are being put out there talking about, times infinity, dividing by infinity being a reality, a part of nature, a part of, formula. It's just the way it works. Um, and so I basically believe I have collected enough evidence and data based on the simple math to prove that my equation is true. This equation cannot be disproven because it's mathematically. If Einstein looked at my equation, it would probably bring him into deeper understandings with all sorts of other things. I could only imagine what some ultra mathematician would think as soon as they heard my conclusion, because they would probably have all sorts of new ideas crossing their mind and understandings. So anyway, let me try to put this out there so then we can kind of debate it and talk about it. Now, I would preferably like people that actually, if you're gonna leave any sort of negative comment, that's fine. But I need we only want to be taking criticism and negative commentary from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and has facts. So if you have facts and links and explanations and reasoning behind what you are doubting or disapprove of, make sure you can prove your case, make sure it makes sense, and make sure that you have links to back it up. Otherwise, let's just keep it positive and just try to add on, oh, well, that links to this, add on stuff that we can work and add on to everything that because we're just trying to figure things out as a whole so that we can potentially figure out something that no one ever really knew. That's why I'm teaching people this, is because if I teach people this, it could open up new understandings to other things. So that's the biggest point of all this. It's like we need to throw out more information that could potentially open up more understandings to other things, not because as far as I'm aware, there's no way to disprove this. It's impossible to disprove what I'm about to reveal and show everybody. So basically, what I'm going to reveal is the mathematical formula that I have finally discovered. It took me a while to discover, but there was a time I was just sitting there and I was like realizing, and then it just kind of ran through my head, and then I just realized, like, oh my gosh, this this has got to be some sort of equation that is like reality. Like it's just something that has to be there, and it's got to be basically a part of nature. It's just like basically like pi. If you look at the decimal of pi or the ratio of pi, it's just there. It's just a part of nature. It's like you can't just cover it up and pretend like it's not there. Same with what I just discovered. You can't really just cover it up. And I think the reason that really no one really noticed it is because it lies in what I'm about to explain. And it was basically like it was microscopically small, and it was like so unnoticeable that it never really crossed anybody's minds, and not very many people noticed it. I'm not saying that somebody may not have noticed it. It's just it hasn't been really brought to our attention and made known as a universal knowing. I mean, as far as I know, if there is a universal knowing of this, then I would love for people to post this information so then we could actually just go into learning more about that. Because, like I said, as far as I'm aware, I'm the first one to actually kind of bring this up in the manner of what I'm bringing it up. Okay, so what I discovered, first of all, I've already kind of solved the equation, so I'm going to show you everything in the order I kind of want you to see it. Because I think it just makes everything easier to make sense of. So here's what I discovered. I discovered that the odds of nothing existing is 1 out of infinite. So I don't know the infinite sign, but let's just say the infinite sign would be an 8. Let's say it's an 8. God, that was so bad. 8. Let's say it has like some sort of sign through it. So now we know, okay, that's infinite. The symbol for infinite. I could go look it up. Let me go look it up, because I'm sure there's a simple sign for infinite. Sign for infinite in math. Oh, it's a sideways 8. Okay, we should have known that. Jeez. So well, maybe people want to use my sign. Maybe they like mine. The 8 with that. The 8 with the S through it. Maybe they like that. Okay. No, we're gonna make it the proper sign. So the oh shit, the sign for infinity is an 8 sideways. It's a sideways 8. Which I knew that. I just I don't know why I forgot. Okay, so it's an 8. That's sideways. Okay, 1 out of infinite. That's the odds for nothing to exist. If this is where the argument begins. This is where, if you can prove me wrong that the odds for nothing to exist are 1 out of infinity, then that's what we're trying to see. Can anybody disprove that? Is it possible to disprove that? Because via mathematics and via nature, this formula cannot be, you cannot debunk that. You cannot, that formula never changes. That formula is always going to be the other half of one side of the formula. So basically, your chances and your odds for nothing to exist equal 1 out of infinite. Now, people are probably a little bit confused of what's so important about this, but this solves everything. This solves all the problems everyone ever was questioning. The reason is that this has to be true is because when you look at the equation, it solves itself with the equation. There's only one state that nothing can exist. There's only one possible state. So when you're dealing with nothing, now the ways for nothing to exist. Remember, when you have nothing, there's only one way for nothing. One way for anything to exist is nothing. There's only one state. They would have to be nothing on top of nothing. So it would be more nothing, more nothing, more nothing, more nothing, more nothing, more nothing, more nothing. Basically infinite nothing. Because that defines nothing. It's infinite nothing. Nothing. It can't be anything. There's nothing. There's only one possible state for nothing because it always equals nothing. So there isn't such thing as nothing existing at quadrant X or nothing existing in quadrant T. See, that's where people are getting confused. They're thinking that nothing can exist in quadrant X. Oh, yeah, but then you can have nothing exists in quadrant T. Well, that's not possible because that's not what nothing is defined as. You can't go into quadrant X. You can't go into quadrant T. You can't go into quadrant C because that doesn't define. That's not the true definition of nothing. Now you're defining something. So now, if you want to try to define nothing into other states, you're no longer defining nothing. You're defining something. You basically might as well make up your own word for that if that's what you're trying to do. So the only way to define for that state of nothing to exist would be 1 out of infinity. Okay, well, you already know that when you're dealing with 1 out of infinity, okay, that when you're looking at the other side of it. So we already know, okay, that isn't the equation. It isn't nothing that exists. Because if nothing exists, first of all, no one would ever know nothing. It would be impossible to know nothing because nobody could know nothing because there would be nothing. There couldn't ever be anything. It's just not possible. So that's what people don't get. First of all, if nothing ever existed, it would always be like that. It would have always been like that, and it's always going to be like that. There's no crossroad. There's no such thing as reaching a crossroad. It's not possible to reach. That's the point of the definition of nothing, because there's nothing. You can't reach anything. You're always equal nothing. That's what people are having a hard time understanding. They don't understand. Oh, times infinity. So the only thing that can balance that is God, because that's what the definition of God is. So now you got to need to understand that, okay, so that is also another great part of the equation solved. Okay, well, if there were not to be a God, what would be a good sign that there isn't a God? Well, the number one sign to know that there isn't a God is if there's nothing that exists. Nothing, not nothing. Like you already have everything out in front of you, your computer right in front of you, your cell phone, your keyboard, your cell phone, papers on your desk, mail, chapstick, lotion, your eyes, your body, everything. Okay? Now, the revelation is this. Okay, so now we understand there's already going to be a chance that there is a God. Okay, because the only possibility for there not to be God is if there's nothing. It would have to be absolutely nothing. But remember, we already know that there's only one state for nothing to exist. So remember, if there is that such thing as that state of nothing that exists, then there's nothing. That means there wouldn't be a God because that's nothing. He does not exist. Therefore, as soon as you enter those times infinite other states on the other side of this coin flip, because now you're already looking at a coin flip. You're looking at, okay, there's only one way for nothing to exist out of infinite amounts of ways, because it's just pure nature. Because if you're in a state of nothing, you're always going to add more nothing, more nothing, more. You don't have a limited amount of nothing. You don't have one state for nothing to exist out of 28 quadrillion, bazillion states that could exist. No, it's times infinite because it's not limited. You always add another. You always add another. It's just the way it is. It's the way it has to be. And that's where I believe science is getting confused. I believe that they're tying this equation to numbers. They're saying, okay, the chances for nothing to exist are 1 out of 80 quadrillion bazillion or whatever. But that's wrong. That's not. How all of a sudden are you putting a boundary on nothing? So how can a scientist try to put a boundary on nothing and define nothing with a ratio of like, oh, it's 80, like 73 with, it's a number with 73 zeros behind it. Let's say a 1 with 73 zeros behind it. How are you going to all of a sudden go 1 out of whatever number that may be, 73 to the googolplex or whatever it is? So now all of a sudden you're saying the chances of nothing existing are 1 out of 73 to the googolplex or whatever, 73 googolplexes. You're looking at a big difference because you can always multiply their number times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, and then you're hitting numbers that no one even thought could even be possible. That's the whole reason you tie it times infinity, because that's what infinity is when you just add another, 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 because that's nature. You can always just add another, add another, add another, add another, because what's stopping anybody from just adding another, adding another, adding? You can't just limit 1 out of whatever. So now we concluded, okay, well, we know 50% of the equation. We know 50% of the way that nothing can exist. So now it's our duty to figure out, well, what's the other 50% that everything can exist? See? That's where everybody keeps forgetting how important this half of the equation is, because you already solved 50% of the equation. Remember, when you solve 50% of the equation, you're already solving 1-to-1 ratio. Now, to know anything else about the other side of that ratio is a bonus. It's all bonus, because now you're going over 50, because we already have 50% of all possession of the formula of knowing. So the only other half of the formula we're missing is, okay, well, what is the odds of everything existing? Okay, so now we already know that's the other 50%. For nothing to exist or for everything to exist. So we already have 50% of the equation solved for nothing to exist. Now, the only way to solve the other 50% of the equation for everything to exist is if it's tied into the other part of the formula. So I argue that the odds for anything or everything to exist, / it could be anything because it would be equal, but the odds of everything to exist, why would that change? So I approximate the odds of everything existing to be 1 out of infinity. It's 1 out of infinity. So now we've solved both equations. We solved the first 50% and the second 50%. So when you're multiplying infinity times infinity, you just get infinity. It's always infinity. So there's where everyone's confused, and they're going to argue, well, why is the odds of everything to exist 1 out of infinite? Well, now we kind of just connect the dots and we play by mathematical rules. Because remember, as soon as you solve 50% of the equation, you basically solved everything. That's everything you really need to know. Okay, if you know half, it's gonna, because the other half don't matter. You don't need to know the other half. As soon as you have the value of 50%, you can base the value on that 50%, that side of the half. You don't need anything to do with that other 50%. That don't matter. The only thing you need to make sure you can solve is 50%. If you can solve 50%, you've solved enough to dominate and have the house advantage, to have what matters most, what's mattering. So remember, you're going to always tie yourself to the 50% that you can get information out of and get value out of. So you are getting value out of this because this does solve problems. This does solve the answer. So anyway, the odds for everything to exist are 1 out of infinite. Okay, there's only one way for everything to exist. Okay, same for you. The only way for everything to exist is if you exist the way you exist, as you exist, the way you always did exist. Right? So you have 1 out of infinite ways to exist. I have 1 out of infinite ways to exist. Because the only way I can exist is the way I always have existed, became to exist, and am existing now. That's all science can conclude, because that's all science probabilitates to be useful, because you always want to probabilitize based on, well, what is expected. Well, what is expected? Well, you look at your own self. The only way I'm expected to exist is if I exist in this one state of matter. If I existed from the time that I began to exist at that time. That's the only, if I would have not existed even 1 second different than the time that I did exist, it wouldn't exist. It's impossible. That's how come people are forgetting it's 1 out of infinite, because I can't exist in any other state of form. It would be impossible for me to exist any other way. If everything didn't happen the way it did, so we're talking if every single raindrop out there in this universe didn't fall the way it fell, I wouldn't exist, because that's what's the definition. That's what defines. That's what's revealed and solved. And people don't want to believe that, because they're like, oh, just because one rock was rolled. Yeah, well, that's just the way infinite works when you're dealing with those ratios and probabilities. So yeah, the truth is the only way I can exist is I only have 1 out of infinite chances to exist myself, because it just has to be the state that it is now. So therefore we have solved that there must be a God. What is the definition of God? The definition of God is a person who knows everything that it does matter, and he knows everything that doesn't matter. In a story, that's all God is defined as. He knows everything that matters, everything that does not matter. As soon as you know everything that matters and everything that does not matter, you are times infinity, times infinite. And remember, if you are, say that you were to be God, or if I were to be God, you can only exist as God in that one state of form. There would only be one way. First of all, it would have never have had a beginning. It would have always been like that, and nothing could ever change. And that's the only possible outcome it could have ever been, because if any other outcome were to be, it would have been crossing over to nothing, because that's the definition of 1 out of infinity. It always has to be that one potential aspect. So this mathematical formula reveals that there has to be a God, because, well, the chances of nothing existing are 1 out of infinite. Where does that formula look similar? Well, what are the chances of God existing? His odds of existing are 1 out of infinite. Why do you think we keep seeing this formula repeat itself? Well, the chances of nothing existing, 1 out of infinite. What are the chances of everything existing? Well, it's 1 out of infinite. Okay, isn't that weird? Well, what are the chances of God existing? Well, 1 out of infinite. Okay, so now you got to jump to the side of, okay, well, if anything exists, therefore there has to be a God. Well, then if nothing exists, well, then there can't be a God. End of story. That's the only way you can properly mathematically conclude that there is not a God, is if nothing exists. Now you can conclude there cannot be a God because nothing exists. Therefore, if anything exists, you must conclude that there has to be a God, because that's the only way mathematics dictates it to be possible. All right, well, that wraps my story up. I hope you guys like that. Don't go flaming my post if for some reason you're not feeling my knowledge and you don't believe in it. Keep your negative comments to the side. I'm willing to take criticism and comments, but I would like some explanations and reasoning behind it. So let's just try to add on productively, because first of all, you need to start off with trying to prove a formula for me. If you're going to come at me trying to say I'm wrong, very first thing you're going to need to do to prove that I'm wrong is I want you to prove me, what formula do you get that nothing can exist? Because if you can write me a formula of 1 over anything other times infinity of nothing existing, that's where you're going to have to start. Otherwise, I'm not listening to one thing you say, because first of all, I already know that this formula for nothing to exist, you cannot disprove this formula. It's not possible. So first of all, if you want to prove yourself of knowing anything, you need to prove to me, and everybody, not just me, well, how do you solve that nothing can exist otherwise in any other format of a formula out of 1 out of infinity? Because I've already concluded that it's impossible to get any other formula other than that 1 out of infinity. So you're going to have to do the impossible. You're going to have to prove that the odds of nothing existing in another format, in another formula, that is not expected to exist. It's not expected to exist for you to come up with some other formula. And I got another question for you. And if you're so smart and you're trying to disprove my mathematics, how is it that all of a sudden you're only going to go putting your mathematics out there after I try to challenge you? Why isn't your discovery being revealed before my discovery? Why is my discovery what you're basing all your work off of? You're only all of a sudden coming to your great conclusion, your great discovery, after you're trying to reverse my discovery. See, I already know someone's going to try to reverse my formula and try to come up with some other formula, which is fine. I would love to see other formulas, but I want to see a formula that makes sense and that is useful. I mean, don't get me wrong. If it's nature and it so happens to not be useful and there's no other way, that's different. That's kind of just perplexing and interesting. That's the way it is. I always accept things for the way they are. So anyway, you're going to need to start off with proving that nothing can exist in some other state of format. Okay? Because when you're dealing with nothing, there's only one format that nothing can exist in. So try to explain to me how you're going to tell me nothing can exist in some other state of nothing. So you're trying to tell me there are different states of nothing. You're no longer dealing with the definition of nothing if you're already putting nothing into other formats of states. Because that isn't the definition of nothing. So you guys had better get back to your drawing board